I remember looking at a forum that was talking about different armor types that you can get in Mass Effect, and they were like, is it worth, buying such and such armor from the Spectre requisition? It's super expensive, but is it really valuable? And someone was like, or is it basically worth it? And somebody was like, just play the game, bro. You do you. And I just remember thinking,
Not helpful.
what, yeah, what do you think this person is basically doing? Like, they essentially are playing the game. It just happens to be on Reddit right now, but that is an extension of the game.
Yep.
And I just remember thinking, what a hilarious, like, somebody sitting there logging in going, I need to reply to this person to let them know that
Just do you, bro. I'm trying to, which is my choice of doing me is being informed. Thanks.
Alanah, you work for a developer now.
I do, yeah.
You're the man.
Sure, yeah.
Is that, I don't know if you can speak to this, is that part of it? Like, are there people that go, hey, part of this game is going to be the extracurricular, extemporaneous things that happen outside of our actual, do you think that that's true emergent gameplay is when it bleeds out over into social and everything else?
I definitely can't speak to that in terms of the company that I work for. However, I've done a number of interviews. Like, I made several mini documentaries at IGN, meaning I've just interviewed a lot of developers, and that's absolutely a thing. The ones that I always find really interesting are when they are intentionally trying to get cosplay around certain characters and how they approach that.
Like Borderlands?
Yeah, like Borderlands did it like really specifically, was like, yes, this was made with cosplay in mind. But there are loads of them that do that. They're like, we just really want to see people dress up as these characters. And like, I wonder like how, if that's from a marketing team, I don't know, but how difficult that is. I've always been like, how do you even approach that? They're like, lots of stuff and usually colors. Like, oh, cool.
I feel like that would be, it has to be internal, right? Because like in that example, you're talking about that impacts design, that impacts character modelers, that impacts animation, that impacts everything else. Marketing is always seems to be way too late.
Yeah.
There was like, okay, what do you got? We're like, we have these things. We're like, we'll make it work.
I'm sure marketing comes in with like extra armor, like pre-order bonus armor. That could be a thing that potentially doesn't start with the dev team and starts much later than that. But
if it's a big enough project, though,
throw out. Can you go ahead and if we monetize it, can you throw it back in? They're like, okay,
it's true.
If it's a sufficiently big project, though, marketing is involved from day one. Like,
they're involved from day one, but I mean, as far as like, first of all, I'm not talking out of my ass necessarily, but I'm certainly not as qualified to speak to this as most. But just my experience has been, it's always like we get involved and then we go away, you make your game, and they come in and there's like they hit the milestones.
Depending on the studio, they aren't even actually involved from day one. They're just told. So they would be told what is being worked on, but they wouldn't actually have any say in anything at all.
But if it's a huge budget,
no,
I've been a fly on the wall to these conversations before where marketing basically has to be one of several sign-offs on big decisions because they are the ones that are going to be tasked with selling this. And if they look at something and go, we have no idea what that is, what that means, or this character is super off-putting. Everyone's going to have very different takes, and different project leaders are going to have certain iron fists that are more sort of empowered than others. But I've seen it happen where
I guess that depends on the publisher. Definitely doesn't happen for all of them.
Yeah, no, of course not. But and it's also only a phenomenon of those that are being built from the ground up in those kinds of circumstances, because it's not like an indie that then goes and signs a publisher is going to be doing that kind of level of running interference so late in the process. I think it would be more like a marketing of the publisher looks at it and goes, we either can or can't confidently sell this, and that's kind of what determines if they pick up the game.
There's also like there was a title that I was in where marketing got involved and said, we need the main character, the protagonist, to look like a hero. And so they were definitely participating in the conversation of character design with the intention of what's going to look good on the cover box.
Right.
And we had already started shooting, and we had already started, we were down the production pipeline a lot, but we had a rough character model. But as far as like, okay, what is the actual character model really going to look like? Right now, we've kind of mock up. We have a whip that we're able to move around in 3D space and within these scenes, especially, but also as a it's grayscale at that point. But they were going, no, and they're looking at it's kind of very similar to the way that the film world works, where it's like color of eyes, color of hair, height, all of those things, and really, needling on the nuances of wrinkles and stuff like that, as opposed to, and then that of course speaks to like, well, what's our level of fidelity? Like, are we able to support across the board? Is that only in the cinematics? Does that happen? So, I mean, I've seen how marketing can get involved there. So I guess you're right. It's not always a clear cut in case. I just found a pen.
Oh, exciting for you.
It's always interesting because it's so often presented as if it's this very adversarial kind of dynamic where the developers are the kind of, pure artists and the marketing people are like the cold-hearted corporate types coming in and mucking with it. But I've always seen it as like marketing is looking at it from the angle of, can we convince people that this is worth them buying?
Totally.
And if we like, so it's sort of like help me help you kind of thing. And the more that
developers want their games to sell, like I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. I think where marketing really screws things up is, demanding release dates too early, or demanding a thing release at all too early. Like those are the common marketing annoyances.
That's a real challenge.
But is that marketing's call? We've talked about this a little bit before. I don't know if that's
also depends on the studio, but sometimes yes.
I would say, and by the way, people who work in marketing or PR, look, we are equal opportunity disparagers. We'll talk shit.
That's the thing. I don't think we're
that.
disparaging. I don't think
Not
we're
at all.
disparaging. Like, everybody's trying to do their best. It's just there's a lot
I
of.
firmly believe that. I think that everybody is doing their best job. There are inherent unique challenges to every aspect of this industry, whether it be from design, marketing, or whatever. I feel and I can only speak to my personal experience, of course, but I have seen the skewedness be off more when it comes not to marketing, but PR. So, which involves marketing, but it's PR going, we feel like this is what we're going to do. And this is the event that we're going to have. And this is the approach that we're taking. Whereas marketing is trying to, like you said, what's the best way to sell this game? And PR is like, well, here's a great execution of that idea.
I feel like I would.
And PR,
I would think that happens again. It totally changes depending on the studio, but like marketing takes what you have. And it's like, okay, I'll figure out how to sell what you have, where PR can be like, I'm going to change what you have, actually. That's probably a thing. It's, definitely is. Again, and every single publisher is different. Like, I always wonder do you think that Rockstar has to talk to Take-Two in the early stages of anything they do?
Or does Take-Two just go, hi, sorry, just want to see what's going on with it.
I understand you're going to make the most expensive game ever made again, but, do we need to see any of that, or you just trust them?
Yeah, I think there are some relationships that are slightly more privileged than others after a certain point.
Yeah.
I think that is the tail definitely wagging the dog.
Yeah. At that point. Yeah, I feel like that one they probably get to do kind of whatever they want, but I don't know, it is, we don't have a PR marketing person on the podcast. We're missing play, watch, listen, promote. We need to add someone from that field.
Play, watch, listen, sell.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest understanding of it, again, from even the people I know who work in marketing and PR, is that it is super different depending on the publisher. Like, way, way, way different. I know that EA is really involved from the start.
I would say, like, you could break it down to the granular level. Like, it's going to be the publisher, the studio, and the title, right? Like, there's some people's like, just because you're Sony, or just because you're an Activision, or whatever, depending upon where you fall in their pecking order, and then depending upon what title you're going to be. That's going to be like, we don't have the marketing spend that whatever has. We have this. Like, I wouldn't want a game like, I'm trying to think of a nice Sony first party developer that is definitely skewing to be like Edith Finch, or no, that's not a first party, but I mean, like something like that's more artistic, to have the same kind of, I wouldn't want to see that on the side of a bus. I wouldn't want to see that,
How heavily was
advertising.
Journey marketed, Austin?
I
don't remember.
It was definitely not marketed. Its success is not a reflection of its marketing. It had a runaway word of mouth. It was not like it got, trailer placement, and it got media coverage and things, but there were no big billboards. There were no buses. There were no buses. There were no, ad buys that I can remember in terms of like big play. I don't even remember big featured, like, the equivalent today. It was amazing how it was so different even just 9 years ago, but the equivalent today of like center stage at, the Game Awards kind of thing, or like a big Gamescom unveiling like Erica did or whatever. Like I don't even recall, because I think it was largely reliant on the fact that Flower had built up, the pedigree of that game company within the kind of the more niche world of the indie. I've always found it weird thinking of that game as an indie, but within the space of people that are not necessarily only looking at the God of Wars and Uncharted's that were going on at the time. I think that Flower kind of paved the way. But then, honestly, the thing that I remember was just when the review embargo dropped and like 1,000 reviews came out all at once that were like 10 out of 10. This is one of the most striking things I've ever played ever in my life. And it was just like, when something had that, it's like when lightning strikes 10 feet away from you, it's just it just shakes the whole world.
Yeah.
And so that my impression was that return on investment from a marketing standpoint had to be one of the best they've ever had, because I really don't remember a big marketing push at all. In fact, funny enough, usually the where I come into these conversations often is that soundtrack albums are basically an extension of marketing. They used to be a far more powerful one, because you would get like so-and-so famous artists to contribute something, and then the album became its own activation point in marketing speak for people to get into it. And so, that was the reason why the end credit song became a thing back in the day, 30 plus years ago. And
that was for marketing?
That was marketing. That was record deal.
It's on the radio.
Wow.
It was record companies making deals because they realized we could have a hit song that drives people to check out the movie, and also is like, in its heyday, you're talking in like the 70s and 80s, even into the 90s, the notion of the film single, the hit song from the movie, could generate outrageous amounts of money that's just like bonus for the movie, millions of dollars. So that the whole idea of soundtrack albums as an extension of marketing is kind of where they come from, really, because this music, that's why when you go back, especially, and you listen, like all these specialty record labels that do old scores that never got soundtrack albums, like, for example, there's a label that did a bunch of episodic scores from the Twilight Zone TV show. And when you go back and like, that was never ever released. Like, they never did soundtrack albums for TV in general, but they definitely didn't do it for a show like that. And so, you go back and you listen, and the recordings are, they're a little iffy in places. Like, there's wrong notes here and there, or you can hear like a page turn and stuff, because they were like, you can't hear it in the context of how it's mixed into the show. And no one ever expected this stuff to be released on its own. So it was those details were irrelevant. And they would never do that now, because it's just this presumption that everything is going to get released. But now, the marketing support soundtrack album thing represents, it represents far lower stakes than it used to, because
Does that mean to you that
not-
you always sign up for 2 jobs? That you're always signing up to score the game and then release an album?
Very often, yeah, and sometimes they are separate contracts.
Right.
They are, and they're often, or we'll put like a bunch of language that says we'll figure out the soundtrack album later and make a separate deal. Because especially now in the game world, there's all these things to consider. There's all the streaming domains. There's Twitch, and like how are we going to navigate that, and potential, like is there a label involved that might be doing copyright notices or takedowns, those kinds of things. And then there's also the bundling potential, like if we can put this on Steam, like where you add an extra $1 or whatever, and you can get the album that way. Like there's a whole lot that goes into it that we don't know the landscape of often when we're at the beginning of a project and just starting it. So, but I can tell you, I've had album edit revision notes, and I've had album art. Like I'll go commission an artist and I'll get album art revision notes from the marketing of the game, because they're like,
You commission artists for the album art?
If I can, I prefer to.
Interesting.
Usually, because I always like to make album art, especially if we're talking about vinyl. I really prefer that album art be an expression of something, unique and parallel to the game, not just a reuse of the main like box art or key art or whatever. To me, it's uninteresting. I prefer
You
it
finally
be this
made it
little
in.
opportunity.
I've been attacked by a dog. She kept making noise out there, and I was
see
like,
you're
she's going to come in
visiting.
here eventually. You want to come up here? Hey, Ed. Come on. Come on. She's very
Is this
cute.
our stand-in mic?
Yes, Mike Bithell, ladies and gentlemen.
Mike really loves those chin rubs like
He sure
nobody's
does.
business.
I was wondering how long it would take for her to open the door. She doesn't like being alone.
It's like the velociraptors in the kitchen, like
Exactly.
got the,
Does she
the dramatic
also have an
close-up.
accent?
Hi.
Like, she's like, hello,
Yeah, her barks.
Alanah.
Her barks have
She
a
barks
twang
like,
in them.
"Arr!"
I'm a laying the
Gotta
Long
door.
vowels. Anyway,
Yeah.
So you better.
makes sense to me, Elson. I just wouldn't have known that you did that. I feel like your
And the funny,
your job of all of our jobs requires so many investments. Like, I don't feel like, I guess Troy would have to, like a lot of voice actors, you'd need to like go through the effort of buying a booth, especially post-pandemic. But I don't need to buy anything to write. I got in a motorbike accident and couldn't even use my hands, and I was still working because I could use my fingers like this. I just couldn't use my thumbs. And I didn't need anything. Like, it seems so comparatively cheap to be a writer versus a composer. In that way.
funny enough, this is why I was going to mention something else about Journey and the marketing, so help me remember. But I will say, as a hard tangent off of that, what you're sort of tapping into and peeling the curtain back on is why, by federal court edict in the U.S., composers are forbidden from unionizing, because we are basically considered management and not labor, because we oversee
Right,
so
that's
much
cool.
production.
That's nuts.
But in a way it makes total sense, like,
Does that
because
mean
And you hire.
the notion of like the romantic idea of I'm going to sit down with my pad of paper, my staff paper, and write some sheet music. Oh, little Mikey.
And give people the content
And,
they want.
The notion that I basically just kind of write it and then ship it off, and it gets recorded, and the whole process kind of manages itself. Like, those days are, for all intents and purposes, done for. They used to be the old days of the studio music department. The composer delivers the sheet music essentially, and the music department says, we got it from here. And some studios, Sony most noteworthily, in the game world, operate a bit like that. Like the Sony CSG Creative Services Group really does administer. Like, if you look at the behind the scenes of everything from, Ghost of Tsushima, The Last of Us, Returnal, every Sony title, it's the same handful of people you'll see recurring in all of those from the Sony side of it, because they are extremely hands-on with the music production for all Sony titles. They don't just say to the composer, bring us a finished product, however you get there, we'll get there. Like, they actually steer the ship. They're very atypical in that way. Even Ubisoft
Would you
doesn't do
prefer that, or I guess it would depend on the person, but Does that take some of your freedom
I
away?
adore it. It does take some freedom away, but in exchange for collaborative partners who know what they're doing.
True.
Like I've worked with those folks before, and I count them as good friends, and they're magnificent at what they do. So I've done that dance with them, and I've enjoyed it, and I've also done the just like leave me to my own devices approach. I mean, like Ubisoft was an extreme example where on Syndicate, I mean, I was literally recording at Abbey Road for a week, and there wasn't even anyone from Ubisoft there. Normally there'd be a whole entourage of sort of invested stakeholders.
Yeah.
They're part of the process in the booth, giving feedback. I remember when we were on Journey, even on a title fraction of the size, even on Journey, I remember when we were recording the orchestra and the music producer for Sony is, saying, well, take 4 from the orchestra at bar 7. I wasn't happy with how they sounded in terms of, the E flats being in tune. Can we get another take? And it's like, and there's a title, the fraction of the size of it. And Ubisoft was like, just send us the final mixes. Yeah.
Wow. Does that mean that you think that in order to be a good composer, you would also need to have good management skills?
It's hard to imagine the composers that I know that are successful that don't feel as confident in that either do everything themselves, like they rarely work the way I do, like they are largely, like a good example of this off the top of my head, and this is actually not an implication of her management skills, because I don't have any idea her management skills, but Sarah Schachner is somebody who the vast majority of what you hear of her work is like homebrew. She's got a giant mountainous wall of vintage and analog and current synthesizers, and she cooks up everything organically. She also plays a bunch of instruments, so she tracks herself playing. And so the idea of spending huge amounts of time, she has done orchestral recordings like on Call of Duty. And so it's not that she can't do it, or that it's just when you think of her stuff, you think of the handful of Assassin's Creed games that she's done, and what was the BioWare Anthem, like it's very electronic, and so there's somebody where management is rarely a job necessity for someone like, or Darren Korb is another good example. Darren does everything himself with almost no exception.
I imagine Mick Gordon would be like that too.
I think and I don't know precisely his process, but I would imagine it's not dissimilar to Darren's. But then, someone who's like me, obviously management is a crucial part of the equation. There are also some composers that have like business partners that are kind of like the producer half, where their job is to write the music, and the producer management type is who they delegate all that to. For example, I remember John Debney, who I used to share a studio with, who's done a million. He's dabbled in games here and there. Like he famously did that ill-fated Sony game, the dragon riding one called Lair, that they spent an ungodly boatload of money on, and it ended up tanking quite hard. But he wrote a big, grand, old-fashioned score for that ages ago. This was a PS3 game. But he's mostly done movies. Like he works a lot with Jon Favreau, and he's done a million romantic comedies. And John, he and his wife, beyond being a happily married couple, are also like business partners in that way, where if I have any question for John that is remotely outside of the immediate domain of like why F sharp is the tempo too fast in this cue, Lola is kind of in charge. She's the one, coordinating. I mean, they obviously work together, but she's the point of contact so that he can focus on the music. And there are other composers I know, Winifred Phillips, who's worked on, she did one of the AC kind of the big, those big like expansions that they did. I can't remember which one that she did, but like it wasn't Freedom Cry, but those like not quite full-sized AC games that are nonetheless like huge expansions. She did one of those. She also worked on a bunch of the Little Big Planet stuff. She has a producer who is, I think, like Winifred's job is to write the music, and the producer, whose name is escaping me, her job is everything else, as far as I can tell. I don't know Winifred particularly well, but so some people, yeah, they find somebody.
That's really common for writers as well, to have writing partners. That's less so probably, I mean, it could actually be having one of them do management or outreach or whatever else, and then the other one do a bulk of the creative work. But two people as a writing team who write together on absolutely everything is very, very, very common. I feel like you don't hear about the two of them as often, but I feel like that is so frequent that I've always been like, I should find one of those. It seems like that would be a good idea.
Yeah, I have a good friend who was a writer on Star Trek Discovery, who is is half of a writing team. Like, they individually do their own things, but their whole career so far is as a unit that has moved around through a bunch of high-profile TV shows and stuff, and to me that's fascinating. There are a few composer examples of this, like the Newton brothers, which is funny because they're not brothers and they're not named Newton, but the Newton brothers score all of Mike Flanagan's stuff. So they did the two Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor. They did his movies like Oculus and Doctor Sleep. And they've done a bunch of other things. There's a new Raid or Purge, that franchise.
I do really want to start watching those movies. They're on my list.
I've never seen a single one of them either, but there's a new one that's out like right now or about to be or whatever that they did. And the Newton brothers, Andy Grush and Taylor, blanking on his last name.
Why are they called the Newton brothers then?
There's a reason, and I can't remember what it is. There is a reason, and I am blanking on what it is. But because I always just knew Andy, I met him years ago. That they are. I don't think it's in their case like one does the writing, one's the business. They are co-composers, and I don't think they ever do any. I don't think there is any like Andy Grush scores out in the world. It's all Newton brothers. They are a unit. It's like a band that's like, it takes the band breaking up before they do their own things. I assume. I don't know. It's pretty rare though. Composers tend to want to kind of do things their way. But one thing I was going to say that I am now relieving you of having to remind me of about the marketing and the soundtrack albums.
You are relieved.
Yes, of Command. I want to be host again. I remember on Journey. On Journey, I remember because there was no dialogue or spoken word or anything like that, or text, on screen. I remember Genova goes, the soundtrack is like a spoiler. Oh, look at you, already gave up on the balance.
Troy.
I felt my perspective very slowly shifting. Genova goes, the soundtrack album is like a spoiler for the game if you listen to it before. So ironically, normally, which is true, like it goes through the emotional arc, and if you experience that before you play the game, it might actually take away from the game. That was Genova's fear. And
that's very interesting. I wonder if that would have actually happened, maybe to a small number of very perceptive people or other composers.
I don't know. It definitely tells you, like, if you listen to the music, you realize, oh, it has this very kind of rapturous ending, or at least that's what we hope you take from it. You don't know what's coming, though, if you just play through it. I mean, you could kind of intuit it from a archetypal Joseph Campbell sense, but if you're just playing it at face value, not knowing where things are going, I think is more powerful. So they delayed the soundtrack album's release like 2 or 3 weeks from when the game initially came out. Which was also a hilarious bit of accidental marketing sort of jujitsu, because it built up this massive amount of demand for the album, so that when it dropped, it dropped like huge, because the game had developed 3 weeks worth of like people getting excited.
So it charted immediately.
Yeah, the album did like freakishly well for a video game soundtrack. It was like the Billboard charts highest grossing video game score of all time.
Wow. Nice. Good job.
Well, the funny thing is that means like it was 97th or something on the chart or whatever. It was it's like being, as they say, the world's tallest dwarf. If I can use an indelicate, perhaps out of date,
unsure.
But it that's what it felt like. It was like being at the kids' table at the wedding reception. It was like, hey, I'm the tallest one here. Yeah. Or when Kramer joins the karate class full of all like 12-year-olds in Seinfeld. Someday
Troy doesn't understand the reference, yeah. But I was going to say, to jump back to my earlier assertion that you did not comment on, Troy, what do you think is the startup cost for voice acting? Is what I said there correct? Like, because I've done auditions for voice acting stuff on my phone. Under
0.
a blanket. Yeah, I would have thought so.
Or that's provided that you're not going into a studio. I think now things have changed. And you don't have to. There's no.
But for auditions, you wouldn't audition in a studio, I would think.
Yeah, but they're okay with audition, from my perspective at least, with auditions not sounding perfect. Sound quality being bad. Yeah, we have spoken about that before, though.
There are
limits.
I have not listened to auditions because the quality was bad. And I know for a fact that whether even subconsciously, no one's going to go, yeah, I could barely understand it, and it was distorted, and I made my ears bleed. But there was really something in the performance that I got.
Yeah, true.
That is just a huge hurdle. So I don't think while you have to have like pristine audio quality, set yourself up for success. Don't
I mean, my phone can record video in like 4K, and with audio that's good enough. I would think, right? Like if at some point it's democratized to the degree that anyone who's got like nice lighting and whatever, they're overkill to a point that they're probably buying themselves a fractional percent edge by upgrading.
I mean, I know Rahul does his auditions with an iPhone, and speaking of Mike Flanagan, definitely got The Haunting of Bly Manor with an iPhone. With no microphone.
Everybody, that's what it is. Just shoot it on your iPhone and send it to me, because that's also what they're going to watch it on.
True.
Maybe an iPad.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe an iPad. But no one's going to go into a screening room to watch back, audition reels.
True.
So
that by the way, there's a whole composer sort of like thread there as well of composer auditions are also listened to through phones and laptops, and we have to mix knowing that it's going to come out of the shittiest speakers ever.
You have to mix differently for that?
Oh, for sure.
Wow.
You have to mix in a far more crude, like basically
you could potentially, this may be true as well, you may potentially arrange differently, because if you couldn't do this big low end thing, because it's going to drop off, because most iPhone speakers don't carry anything lower than like
200.
I was going to say, 100. I was going to be great, generous, 100 hertz. So you may not, you either might mix differently, or you may not depend so much on low end to be able to sell the gravitas and the bass of this, thing, or you would have to mix differently. Understand that people are not going to, maybe they're listening to AirPods. Maybe.
You also have to assume that they won't listen for long. So you always have to get to the point. Like my advice for young composers is always get to the point in under 5 seconds. Especially because if they're listening through a phone and the fidelity is working against you, making someone listen to something that's not terribly pleasant of a listening experience just from a pure speaker quality perspective, in addition to taking your time and kind of meandering there. So that's like, it's an unrealistic ask, basically.
It's so funny that like my biggest advice for people applying for writing jobs, as someone who has had to submit samples, but has also had to read a lot of samples, is don't have typos. You wouldn't believe how frequently people are applying for writing jobs that have writing samples that are full of typos. Like I would say 75% of them.
Honestly, that's the same thing within like even pronunciation of words, right? For people who do auditions. To answer your question, there is no requirement of cost.
Yeah.
But people do, if someone does have an agent, there is an inherent level of, for lack of a better word, value or worth that is associated with that. Nobody wants to be the first one to bet on you, but they always want to be the one to discover you. So if you have an agent, that means that somebody else has already bet on you and won. You're there. And
with the caveat that there are some agents out there that will happily sign some naive
It's really bad
person.
for influencers. The way that agents and marketing managers can take advantage of them there.
They will sign them, but they will not submit them.
Exactly.
So an agent is only, every time they send through a submission, it is because they're vouching for them. Because that way, ain't nobody going to a dry well. And if that agent only submits shitty auditions with bad quality,
true,
they lose their standing. And what every agent wants is for someone to go, don't go to anybody else, go straight to ABC, because ABC agency always gives us the best people. And that's what it's not, nobody is out there going, well, let's just throw out the net. If they're doing that, they've never cast before, ever. They're going, we want to cast a wide net. I was like, you're an idiot. Because have you ever like thrown a net over the side of a fucking boat? Are you kidding me? You're going to pull up shoes and
dolphins,
terrible thing, dolphins, all sorts of shit.
I mean, in this analogy, I feel like we want the dolphins, right?
You want to chuck a spear into the ocean and get a swordfish and go
get the dolphin.
No.
Get the dolphin, but none of the
they keep dying. Bycatch.
Yeah, but isn't the whole idea? Isn't your analogy? This is where I'm just I'm making you regret your analogy. Isn't the whole point of like trying to get the most creme de la creme? Like if you're this hunter, avoiding the dolphin is like avoiding the brilliant actor, isn't it? I'm just saying you're the ruthless person who's dolphin hunting.
Dolphin hunting, not so common, but I did just watch Seaspiracy, and I'm just now in a state of constant upset. It's
what? You watched what?
Not Netflix documentary, Seaspiracy. It is basically
I know what that is.
I don't think it came out too long ago, but it's basically about. It was supposed to start being about pollution, I think, and it's actually about the fishing industry.
Barbara Dunkelman, I'm going to give her a shout out on this. It was I haven't seen this, but she tweeted. She was like, "I don't understand how you call it Seaspiracy and how you miss up the opportunity for conspiracy." I was like,
that is a good point. I don't
for workshop that for 30 more seconds, so you have a far better title.
Yeah, but then if you say it out loud, you're just saying conspiracy. Whereas Seaspiracy is a different. Exactly, I'd be like, which one? It's a different title. Marketing.
But you're already talking about it.
That's true. I'm already talking about conspiracy.
The documentary on Netflix. That's not how people are consuming it. It's not word of mouth. It's people sitting like this and they're going. I find those trailers, by the way, for Netflix such an affront.
Netflix
you mean
trailers?
how it autoplays the moment you open Netflix?
Oh my god!
I wish the sound was opt-in. I think it used to be, and then at some point it just started playing back sound.
Apple does it. They're great.
Ted Lasso season 2, ladies and gentlemen. So that's my biggest news of E3.
What?
Ted Lasso season 2. It's been announced. You guys haven't
seen
Ted Lasso?
You're saying it so funny. You're saying it like I've never. It sounds like intentionally trying to make it hard for me to know what you're saying.
No, that's too on Tuesday.
Ted Lasso.
I thought it was Lasso.
Ted Lasso.
It could be.
Yeah.
You're just pronouncing it wrong.
Austin. She said Ted Lasso.
There you go.
Yeah. Ted Lasso.
I'm saying Ted Lasso. I'm
this
sorry. I'm just excited about this very positive show that apparently
this is like a game.
Cowboy. If you're a cowboy and you have a rope, what are you? What is that called?
That would be a lasso.
A lasso.
It's not a French word. It's.
This is like a game I love playing.
It's not LASEAUX. It's not a lasso.
If I play a melody note for note, but I radically change the rhythm, can you still identify it? Like, you know.
Dave.
I feel like I recognized whatever you just did.
But like
Star Wars.
That's what Ted Lasso sounded like to me.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, everybody.
We
apologize.
So this is the whole Taco
That's the name of the episode now.
Taco Bell conversation too.
What?
There's Taco Bell and there's Taco Bell. What do you go? What do you say?
Taco Bell. Taco Space
Also
Bell.
a tree?
I'm having a crisis of identity. I don't know what sounds more natural to me.
Hey, where do you go to get
I think
tacos? The answer wouldn't be Taco Bell.
I was gonna say you go
Anywhere
to
else.
you go to
Where do you go to get diarrhea? Where do you go to get diarrhea?
Chipotle.
Yeah, I was gonna say Chipotle too.
I think I say Taco Bell. I think it is on the bell.
Taco Space Bell.
Yeah, because you're right. It's not one word. It's not like the composer Taco Bell. It's Taco Bell.
I'm just
Taco
really
Bell.
excited about the new season of Ted Lasso. How are you guys saying
It was one of the best things to happen at quarantine. It was
good.
like
I watched it all on
I-
Christmas Day.
everybody.
What
Dude,
is the
I
what is your
got
one sentence
chills.
pitch for that show? I have not seen it and I've been told I must, but what is your one sentence pitch on why I must?
It is
This.
just so positive. Just so positive. That was a pretty good
Man.
pitch. It's
That one chills. That one moment. It could have been so cheesy. It could have been so bad.
No
And I was-
spoilers, please.
It is
You'll be
Rudy with comedy, with
It's very sad,
Oh.
but at the same time, it's just basically someone who is put in a very strange position that is intentionally kind of orchestrated. That is the most positive person in the world, so it doesn't matter what happens to him, really. Without being fake, it's still someone who
Is this
deals
like-
with real shit.
Is this like a realistic If Butters Were an Adult show?
No,
No.
he's not Butters.
he's aw shucks, but he's not naive. And the beauty of it is, I don't want to give away too much.
Give away nothing.
It is.
Sell me
the
on it, but tell me
perfect-
nothing about it.
It is
Marketing.
the perfect portrait of the power of the indomitable human spirit. It is someone who looks in the face of adversity and goes, "Cool." It is awesome, man.
Yeah,
it is.
he's right.
It is so good.
It's really
And I
good.
was like, I guess we'll watch it. And we powered through it. And I was like everybody else on Twitter and everything going, I missed that show and I wish I could go back and watch it one more time. And I might actually do that.
Yeah.
It's just, it made me miss London though a lot. It was just,
It's very good.
it's so good.
Yeah. Highly recommend it. Yeah, season 2, July 23rd. That's my biggest announcement of
One more
E3.
month.
On that
By
note,
the way,
I'm going to welcome everyone to the podcast. 43 minutes in, let's do it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Play, Watch, Listen. I'm Alanah, a video game writer. That's Austin Winter. He's a video game composer. That's Trey Baker. He is a video game actor. Mike Bithell is not with us here today. And my dog has also left the room, so I should get up and shut the door. Are you guys going to be
All right.
okay if I, just for a second, shut the... Okay.
Uh-oh.
oh,
I did that on purpose. I was telling you not to break anything. I'll be right
I
back.
thought Austin muted her again.
sadly my emergency chancellor powers were given back to the people. I have a question that I have to go in a minute, but
So do I.
I'm
What if we
curious.
just left right now? What if we just
She just came back to an empty call. That would be good. That would be good. I'm gonna slide out of frame to make that easy.
I saw you, Troy. I saw you. You were too late. I watched it happen.
I'd commit harder to this if I didn't have to go soon. I would just stay gone for that.
Can't
Can't
sneak
God.
away that easy.
Yeah.
You had a question?
I'm curious. So I finished Resident Evil Village.
Yeah, I was going to ask about
it is-
that.
It's officially the first PS5 game that I've finished.
Nice.
And I'm curious. I remember I got tagged in this article that was one of these weird, sort of trying to be a compliment, but it makes you go, what? Because they phrased it as a list of the top video game scores almost as good as the games themselves. And they had Journey on the list. And it was one of those where I was like, I feel like I understand the well-intentioned vibe of that, but that feels a little bit
it's mean.
like a slap in the face.
Yeah.
And like, I get what they meant though. What they meant was music that in their estimation is so good. It's basically it makes the game almost redundant to the music listening experience. Like the music captures all of the joy of the game so thoroughly that you don't even need the game anymore. That's what they meant, but the way they phrased it was, it's like my favorite fortune cookie ever said, you remind people that there's other great things in life. Like, yeah, I get it. So close, but
not quite.
So to that end though, in that spirit ish, how easily my review of Resident Evil will be sort of implicit in this question, but how easily can you enjoy a game, the two of you, when the writing is really distracting?
In Resident Evil, in Village, I think that the cheese of it is part of the appeal. So it does not take away from my enjoyment of that game whatsoever. I was constantly making fun of Ethan for having one-liners 10 seconds too late.
And really bad ones.
Yeah,
like,
he kills
really,
somebody and he's like, that'll show you. And I'm like, yeah, you sure told him, Ethan. Right on cue there, buddy.
Yeah, after the whole boss battle with Lady Dimishmish, he's like, no, you're who's cursed.
Yeah, and that was like, from ages ago as well.
Yeah, like she's dead. She's a crystal for 30 seconds now. Yeah, similar. Yeah, or like at the beginning when you meet the family and they're all kind of huddling in the house trying to figure out what to do, and then all hell breaks loose. He's known these people for 15 seconds, and then the girl sees her father come out of the flame, and she jumps in after him to save him, and he goes, "Why does everyone I know keep dying on me?" And I'm like, you don't know them.
I think
these
he
are
made
strangers.
mistakes the whole way through there. The thing with the car, and then the thing with trying to make them climb. I think that there were a lot of mistakes that Ethan made in that particular section of the game. But yeah, to Resident Evil, like, it actually the story ended up being more fulfilling to me than I expected in the end. In that spoiler territory, so I will avoid that. But no, I think the cheesiness of it made the kind of cheesy nature of some of the boss fights, having the dialogue suit that, I think is tonally consistent and fun.
I find it though difficult when, like, for example, the creepy fucking underground hallways with the giant baby monster, like that, the earnest creepiness of that represents a different vibe from the one-liners, to the point that it feels like two different games. It feels like the designers and the art team,
I think
and the
what you're
character
referring
designers,
to that is basically a different game. It is Silent Hill inside of Resident Evil.
Well, Angela kept saying the same thing. She
Absolutely.
was like, "This is so Silent Hill."
It is.
Yeah, to me, I just felt like all the designers and all the, like, everyone outside of basically the narrative and writing team brought the A game of, like, this really moody, great, suspenseful, creepy, shooter suspense horror game. And then the other people were like, it's going to be hilarious. We're going to do this and this. And it was like,
I think that's intentional. Yeah, I do think they intend to do that. I mean, the Duke is like a really likable character who I was always excited to see.
I think it's also, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I know I clearly interrupted you.
I was just going to say, I think the intent to give you breaks from the stress is a very big and ongoing part of Resident Evil. That's what safe rooms were. There are less safe rooms this time around, because there are some places where you can save that it's not a safe room. But having moments of dialogue that act as levity from the tension are akin to them having safe rooms, which give you a break from the horror. And things are only scary if you have a break from what's scary sometimes.
There's also safe words.
That's true. Thank you, Troy.
I think there's also a bit of
Is it the ghost? Is it your ghost?
So Traveler, before he goes to bed, whether he's taking a nap or whatever, loves to play the piano.
Aww.
And I love it.
But Troy sent me a photo of it, and it was like late at night, and there was like this lighting from like below. It was the most haunted house thing I've ever seen in my life, and I'm suddenly not convinced Traveler has ever existed. It was the creepiest thing.
Because it's definitely this very, like, we happen to capture this moment of the ghost baby playing piano.
Yeah, it was basically that moment in Ghostbusters where they go down into the library like cardstock in the beginning, and there's exactly.
Very good.
And then Dan Aykroyd gets a blowjob later. in the same movie in a montage.
Yep.
And he allows it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
He loves it.
So
yeah, what's your take on distracting writing?
I think that there's a bit of cultural context at play as well, because it's also biohazard, right? So being able to understand that it's a game that's being developed for essentially two unique cultures. So you have the East and the West are making the same game.
It's true that I guess Japanese, like if you watch a lot of anime, there's also a similar kind of like irreverence juxtaposed with horror that is not uncommon there. That also has that same kind of tonal hard shift. That I suppose I am sidestepping that. And at one point I did think, I said, I wonder if this is less whiplashy in Japanese.
Well, yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that.
Some stuff could also be like, I don't know how to translate that,
That's what I mean.
What you're going to say. So it's, and I don't think that probably at that level, if people have the ability to go, okay, well, you write your own game and we're going to write our own game. And we're going to have, but I do know that the performers in that went to Japan and shot it there. So it wasn't that it was shot by Japanese actors in Japanese, and then it was
definitely some of it was shot in LA, on a stage in LA. I interviewed Lady D on my YouTube channel. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And she said it was in LA, and
part was
could have been both.
To be clear, I liked the game. I mean, I stuck with it, and I'm at a point in my life where if I don't like a game, I do not stick with them. I bail immediately, and I made it all the way to the end. But it was an interesting case study of like, I'm liking this in spite of the cheese, and the cheese is clearly a calculated choice, which is why I was curious if that's a thing.
But it's really only
you guys
Ethan, right? Because I don't feel like the villains are cheesy. I didn't feel like
Ethan. Yeah, he is the worst offender, but it still has very hammy, like, I will destroy you kind of
in the boss fights for sure. But I feel like generally, like, Heisenberg, when he's just talking to you, I didn't think
he felt very Andrew Ryan to me.
Very Andrew Ryan. I didn't think that he was super cheesy. I don't think Lady D is very cheesy, except for when you're being chased and she's talking about being a man thing or whatever.
Again, like when you meet again, I guess this is a spoiler, but when you meet up with Redfield, and Ethan's like, why didn't you explain any of this to me? And he was like, because I knew you would intervene, you'd try to help. And it's like, well,
he did that anyway.
Failed. Yeah, that plan failed miserably.
Yeah, they're all pretty incompetent, actually.
Well, and then because then the next thing he does is like, don't take on Heisenberg alone. It's too dangerous. And I'm like, I beg your pardon. I have just worked my way through all of these characters.
Well, he's also like,
badass.
I guess if we're just in full spoiler territory, he's also like, be super quiet. Here's this tank. Please don't blow your cover. Take the giant mech that I've given you. You're like, what?
No, but it's just the idea that the argument was, you can't handle it. It's too dangerous. And I'm still going to stick with that after you've basically massacred all the bad guys and we're in the 11th hour of this adventure. I just thought...
But Redfield didn't know what was up with Ethan, I don't think. Which is the thing that justifies why he's so invincible.
No, I get it, but your track record by that point, you've beaten like 5 bosses.
It's true.
And he seemingly knows it. They leave laptops everywhere.
They do leave laptops everywhere. Yeah.
I was picturing, I said they must have carried in like giant freight trains of laptops to just scatter them around all these like hidden dungeons and stuff.
And then they just leave all of them, just keep leaving their shit everywhere. Like there's got to be some insurance guy at that company being like, what do you keep fucking leaving these laptops around for? Holy shit.
We have a very high laptop budget.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But I really enjoyed
that's what I mean.
I had such a great time.
So did I. And at some point, I enjoyed the absurdity of these things that I'm kind of picking apart about it. But that's why I was curious if those kinds of things can make you go, I'm sorry, this is just too silly. Like can the raw gameplay float it at that point where you're like, I enjoy shooting these creepy ass zombies and these boss fights and like looking for, and crafting ammo. Like at some point, am I checked out of the narrative, but the gameplay itself sustains me?
I think that happens often. And I think, that's a problem we have with a lot of studios not prioritizing writing to an extent that you just kind of tune the writing out, and sometimes I just don't even know what's happening if I put something down for 2 weeks and I come back. And I do think that's pretty frequent, and I don't think it matters as long as the gameplay holds it. The only time that writing really, really bothers me, definitely happened with Metal Gear Solid 4. This is the most glaring example of a game that I had to walk away from because I got so annoyed, is when, which isn't even necessarily the writing team's fault, cutscenes interrupt gameplay too frequently, where it was like, that game was very much like walk for a minute, cutscene, crawl under a car, cutscene. I'm just like, take away the interaction or give me interaction. Yeah. Just make a choice, because having it taken away and given back, like with such frequency based on such tiny things, I found really frustrating. And that's the only time that really bothers me, I think.
That's what killed me on Death Stranding. Like I couldn't, the first 3 hours of gameplay was 50% cutscenes. And I was like, I can't keep this up.
It's a Kojima thing. He does that.
Yeah.
A lot of cutscenes.
And that's honestly, and not that he needs my defense, but what he's going for is like, I understand that I'm contributing to the game space, and yes, I'm a game designer and a game developer, but what I'm trying to do is bridge these two worlds together so that it's both.
Bridges.
So I get that you're gonna disenfranchise both people, right? But people who don't play games are gonna go, I'm not gonna play a game. People who play games are like, I want to watch a movie.
I prefer to have somebody making something that's distinctly different. And I mean, I asked him one time, I was like, why don't you just make movies? And he said, games are harder. I was like, probably true.
Especially the crazy ass kind of games that he likes to make. Like, I have respect for him in that way.
Way easier.
Yeah,
way
it's
easier
funny.
to make a movie.
It's funny because I really, as a player, I much prefer like purely experiential games. Like I really like, Gone Home or something that doesn't there's zero cutscenes. Like it's all what you do. And that's like more and more my taste in games. But that said, like The Last of Us, is hours and hours of cutscenes, and I was there for every minute of it. So like, I think it also is dependent on the caliber of the writing, obviously, to hold that up. And most games just don't have that level of writing.
But like Gone Home, it may not have cutscenes, but it still has a lot of content, audio-wise. There's still stuff that is interrupting your.
It's not interrupting though. That's the thing. I think that's the key.
I agree.
That's like the BioShock audio logs where you click it, but you keep roaming around and you keep doing your thing, and that as a vehicle for narrative, deployment is so effective for me, at least. Like I love.
Did either of you play Quantum Break?
Yes.
The fact that it had live action chunks. And I feel like people are pretty mixed on that. I ended up really liking
Not Troy.
because I played through the gameplay and then I would watch like my little episode of TV, and then that would be the end of my play session for the night. That's how I played through.
I get that. But to me, it just... I don't like the incorporate, like Her Story notwithstanding, or there's other Sam Barlow. I believe that stick with your aesthetic, but this notion of like, it drove me crazy. Honestly, even in, dude.
Oh,
you've been hacked.
Yeah, I'm good. Even like in Shadow of War, in Shadow of Mordor, the disparity between, or Advanced Warfare was another example too, the disparity between game and cutscene, towards like cutscene was polished and the level of fidelity was higher, but of course you couldn't do that. So certain scenes got a little bit more love than others, and the rest of them kind of relegated to the B team. That was a complete call. It was like, these are big moments, so we really want to, commit more of our resources to them. And I don't envy the position that the developer had to be in for either of those games, because it's a tough one. You want it to look fucking awesome, and you do, especially like with Lord of the Rings, you're going up against the standard of Peter Jackson. But for me, it's like, we're not going to be able to beat Peter Jackson. We can't do it. So instead, keep everything down here. It's like, yeah, but then again, this goes back to the very beginning of the conversation. Marketing doesn't get their piece to be able to put on the TV trailer going, holy shit, that looks incredible. Look at that dragon. But Shadow of War, and really Shadow of Mordor, but Shadow of War kind of one up thinking this a little bit more, where I love that game. Like whether or not I'm in it or not.
No, that game's great. It is very, very good.
It is just, it is one of my most, like, I'm just going to drop in and play something. I can walk away from it anytime that I want, or I can just invest as much time in it as I want. But the thing that still drives me crazy is I'm off doing this one thing, and then, man, Phil, they're like, that son of a bitch, Grey Walker. You're like, fuck. It's those things interrupting. And then especially if I'm like, I am in a flow, I've got that Arkham type combat to where I'm just, or the, Assassin's Creed thing where like, I'm feeling a flow. I'm definitely moving very quickly through this. I'm feeling like a badass. And then a captain walks in. And then over here. And then I have to listen to who's like, I remember when you walked in my life. And my life was, let me tell you who I am. First of all, I am the third son of the house. And they're like, God, fuck, shut up. So I hate it when something becomes a feature of the game becomes an interruption or an encumbrance upon my specific play style. But does that mean that I don't want that feature there at all? Like at what level and how? No one could know, or at least maybe they should have known. You're doing game tests, right? You should be getting enough data to come back and go, people are trying to, that we get button detection where people are trying to cut through, they're trying to skip.
If that bothered a lot of people, they would have known. They definitely would have been
It's so
told.
interesting, that subject of the disparity of like cinematics to gameplay. It's so interesting, just little tangent off of that, playing the Legendary Edition of Mass Effect. It's so fascinating how over the course of the 3 games, those two, the narrowing between those is so dramatic. Like from the cutscenes in the first one relative to the gameplay, it's just so vastly more cinematic and sort of, set PC, and then the gameplay is a little bit more, considerably more stiff. And then they raise the bar a lot with the second one, and like the cameras, subtly move in dialogue and stuff, and the raw gameplay starts to feel more cinematic. But then by the time of the third one, where it's almost seamless. Like it's not perfectly seamless because they have pre-rendered cutscenes where they don't show your party and they don't show Shepard, that they interweave with the gameplay in order to show your Shepard, but then it'll cut to like the Reaper, next to the Shroud on Tuchanka, and it's like that. Suddenly the frame rate is different and stuff, because it's like a canned cutscene, and but it's considering the ambition relative, like the amount of one-upsmanship in from 1 to 2 to 3 of like, let's just keep raising the bar, is really staggering.
That multiplayer is real good too. Good trilogy, as it turns out.
Yeah, well, and even the caliber of like the action and the like as a shooter, the third one is genuinely a good, like it's a good game. Like it's a really, like it's not a vehicle for a great narrative the way the first one kind of a little bit is.
I think the first one's fantastic storytelling.
I love them ravenously. Like it's maybe my favorite, sort of, if taken as a trilogy in one, it's sort of maybe my favorite ever. But it's so fascinating how the first one, I really thought I know we talked about this a little bit. I really thought the first one would be more updated to be like the others than it is. But anyway,
I can sometimes have issues with things being too seamless in terms of cutscenes though. Like what year did it come out? 2016, I think, Tomb Raider. It was very impressive the first time, but it basically will begin or end a cutscene and go straight into you having to control Lara. So say she's going through a cave and she's walking through it, and then suddenly she just stops. And that's how you're supposed to take control again. And that game does that a lot. To the extent that I was like, I don't know, am I doing this? Am I walking up this tower right now, or is the game doing this? And I found that to be a little bit jarring because it was so seamless. They transitioned them just without any cut, to the extent that I was like, this is me now. This is me. This part is me. When do I pick up the controller?
I remember liking that game. I couldn't remember.
It is I like the whole trilogy.
Because God of War obviously is like raised the bar dramatically on the notion of there being no differentiation between those, and it never pulled me out of it.
But I feel like it is still, the framing is often distinct enough that when you get back into you controlling it, camera pulls out a little bit, or it has to go behind Kratos' back again, or whatever else. Where with Tomb Raider, it's exactly the same. You just have to press the move
I see
forward.
What you mean. Yeah, like funny enough, Mass Effect 3 does that a lot too, where there'll be a lot of dialogue and a lot of stuff right up until you're supposed to take control, and the camera always does this swing around and landing in that third person camera perspective, and it obviously the UI and shit pops up too, which makes it very obvious. But even without that, you feel like, I always would like have my coffee, so I'd like go grab my coffee during the cutscene, and you have a few seconds heads up before the gameplay starts because of that camera move, always sort of cueing you that it never just cuts straight.
Troy, can you speak to that? You've directed cinematics. How do you approach ending the cinematic?
You always have to understand what happens to the player character after this. And it definitely controlled my blocking, my camera, because it was like, if you ever did a thing where, and then they walk out of frame, there's going to be, then what happens? Typically what happens is we would always, like, Talion's a perfect example in Shadow of War. We'd always have to end typically on a shot of Talion, because then we would come back around behind him. So it felt weird to have him leave, and now where are you putting him?
True.
In the same way of triggering a cutscene, where are you in relationship to where you just were? So it's always weird, like, GTA does this. There's a lot of things where it's like, hey, these are optional. Whenever it's an open world game, it's like, we're going to if you click X on this, you're going to store X, is going to, start this mission. We have you enter from a different place. We have you all of a sudden, now you're warping down to this place, even though it doesn't start here. Even though we may return you back to this same spot when it's actually out of that cinematic. But a lot of times we have to go back in and reshoot stuff, because you're like, so we shot it this way, but actually this has been moved down here, so now we need to have a change here. But it definitely, camera placement and blocking are driven by those things. That's when people say it's seamless, I'm like, that's bananas. Like, if you're able to pull that off, that is such a forward thinking, as we all say all the time, like playing three-dimensional chess, because you're constantly thinking about design, player agency, camera, all of that stuff. So that's tricky. That's really, really tricky. Side scrollers for the win.
I mean, there's also like the interesting challenge of if you just let players have full agency over a cutscene, what they will do, like in Half-Life. But then generally they will just jump all over the place and crawl at things and ruin any dramatic delivery, because they're kind of changing the timing by moving around the room.
Banging your crowbar on Alex and getting no reaction.
You're still technically getting the information, but I feel like the silliness of it can completely ruin the actual delivery of whatever information, or even the tone of a scene, because you're giving the players too much control. And everyone, when you have control, you want to do something. Like, if I'm just stuck somewhere, I'm going to tap A to jump or whatever else, like that is a thing that you want to do. You don't want to just sit there and be delivered to. It's almost like you'd prefer the cutscene than Limitless, the opportunity to play around in a tiny room.
Yeah, that's why a lot of times what they'll do is they'll put them as like, this is on a corridor, you're on a forest walk, which is,
Gears of War does it a lot. You're walking down a hallway, getting information through the walkie-talkie thing. Like, you have to control them somehow.
Mass Effect 3 also does, I think, a pretty good job of not making you lose your mind from it takes away. You can't draw your gun. You can't roll. You just can only walk and sort of half-pace sprint while people are talking.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like... normally, again, it would feel... I think players would get frustrated. Like, I want to be able to draw my gun. But by selectively pulling back on that bit of agency, it forces you to stick with the kind of immersive storytelling in a way that feels a lot less forced than a cutscene.
Yeah.
Certainly. And I like that. Again, the third one does that far more effectively than the second one, I think, in general.
Great games.
Time.
Yeah,
I gotta run.
Yep. Cool.
Wait.
Thanks for answering my question about games almost as good as their writing.
Yeah, we really spoke about video games today. Look at us go. Anyway, bye, Troy, and bye, everyone else. We will see you all next week. How does that go so high? How tall?
It's a desk that was designed for Lady Jamishamish.
Yes, Jamishamish, as they call her.